Many of you have substantial expert witness practices. Some of you bring in a substantial amount of revenue, and very few people have any succession planning being done. Now, similar practices by accountants, dentists, lawyers, and other professionals are actually being sold for a substantial amount of money currently. So if you had a business that was generating hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, would you just close it down and walk away from it? I don't think that you would. And I've been consulting with experts who have been buying and selling and taking over practices. And I'd suggest to you that this is actually starting to happen now. We're right on the cutting edge. Tennessee Williams said, "I knew none of us was immortal, but I thought I was the exception." And I think a lot of us kind of think that way. Now, many expert witnesses have developed successful expert witness practice, and they've put too little thought into succession planning. It's due to the press of time. We're all very busy. We haven't given any thought to it. How many of you here have thought about succession planning? A few of you. Now, all of us have the time. All of us hope that we have the time and the good health to wind down our business affairs when we feel that that's the time. Unfortunately, nothing like that always proceeds in an orderly fashion. Too often, you hear of an expert getting sick. He has to close his practice, nothing to show from it. Or an expert has to go out on disability, has disability, professional discipline, retirement, or other problems. And as you know, sometimes experts, as we get older, the experts pass away and their families have very little, if anything, to show for their practice. In one infamous case, the expert has had his career cut short when an elderly expert, during the middle of a deposition, turned to both of the lawyers and asked which side was he testifying for. And that was the end of that expert witness's practice. So I would suggest to you that at a minimum, you want to start to have some kind of succession plan. And at a minimum, you want to think about what should your spouse or your attorney do if the expert can no longer carry on with his duties. For example, I had dealt with an expert witness who was getting along in age, and unfortunately he passed away. There was no succession plan whatsoever. And his spouse had to scramble around trying to figure out what to do. And the other thing, which is most important, is that his family got nothing from his practice. Nothing whatsoever. So he had a successful business that was generating hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. And he got sick. He passed away. That was the end of the business. And then they not only didn't get anything from the business, then they had to spend money to wind down the business. And they had to hire attorneys and accountants and so forth to wind down the business. So that's not what you really want to do. You want to have a written succession plan, some kind of a plan, just like you would have a will or a trust or an estate. So we have wills, we have trusts, we have estates, but now we have businesses. We have businesses that are generating $200,000 a year, $300,000 a year, $500,000 a year. There's no plan whatsoever to what to do with that business after you get sick, you get elderly, you have to retire, or anything like that happens. And that doesn't make any sense to me at all. The contacts and relationships that you have with attorneys, insurance companies, adjusters, and others can be transferred, they can be sold, and they can be capitalized on. You have dozens, each of you have dozens and dozens of relationships, and I think it's important that you start thinking about that. Who's going to wind down your business? Who's going to return the active files? Who's going to review the outstanding contracts? Notify the clients? And is there a way to maintain the viability of the expert witness practice? And I would suggest to you that there is. And you can have that practice, your practice that you've spent so many years building up and worked so hard to build up. You can have that practice set up so that can generate business and income for your family after you're no longer practicing. So it's imperative that you make a plan so that your family will be taken care of. And don't wait for a crisis. Most of us, unfortunately, are so busy taking care of others, we don't have time to take care of our own. It's the old story of the cobbler who doesn't have time to take care of his own shoes. The plumber, when you talk to a plumber's wife, their pipes are falling apart. You talk to a builder, and their spouse, their house is falling apart. They're building everybody else's house. They have no time to take care of their own. Well, it's the same thing. It's really the same thing here. It's the same exact thing. So determine what are your goals and objectives. Now, when you talk, the reason this room is not filled with people, there's a very simple reason. People think when you talk about succession planning, reduce workload or take over, that means you're going to retire imminently. And I would suggest to you that that doesn't mean that at all. What it actually means is that you're making a plan for the future. You may want, at some point in time, to work less hours. You may want at time to reduce your travel. You may want to transition out of your practice. You may want to sell your practice. You may want to continue to work as an expert witness part-time and have somebody else take over the responsibility of the business. And you also want to think about what's going to happen after you transition out or sell your practice. So these are the things that you want to start to think about. So let's look at some of the case studies which I pushed up in the handbook. Okay, case study number 1. These are cases that I've been involved in and worked on already. This is over the past couple of years. So for those of you who think that this can't be done, these practices can't be done, and these practices can't be sold or modified, that's just absolutely not correct. So case study number 1, we have a 75-year-old expert. He's established a forensic practice. He's written and lectured extensively. He no longer wants to testify. He is 75 years old. He wants to wind down his practice. He's been a consultant he has a consultant that he's been working with for many years. The consultant's about 45 years of age. Now, the expert, the 75-year-old PhD expert, has been getting all of the publicity. She has written all the articles, she does all the lectures, and so on and so forth. And it's her business. And she wants to transition out of the practice. So I dealt with both of these people in the practice. I talked to both of them. They talked about their goals. And then I wrote them a note, and this note is in your handbook. I enjoyed working with you. These are the questions that you need to answer and that we work to resolve. Number 1, can Danielle or the 45-year-old expert take over the practice at some point? Will she be committed to doing what it takes to make this a success? She had a long way to go, the 45-year-old expert. She didn't have a national reputation. She hadn't been giving lectures. She hadn't been writing anything. She's been just acting as a consultant for this other expert. How can you increase the amount of income from the business? How long is it going to take this newer expert to get up to speed? And then, more importantly, how is the new expert going to get up to speed? How can you help build up her brand? And then we went through some of the things you can do to help build up her brand. On the articles that are in transition, make her a co-author. On some of the lectures, let her take over your lectures. Increase her visibility, nationally, regionally, on a state basis. These are the things that you need to do. Start making introductions to the clients. Okay? Clients will understand. Make introductions to the clients. Institutionalize the practice. And that's one of the things that needed to be done. This was essentially, it was a one-man consulting practice. And a lot of you face the same problem. You have a one-man consulting practice. You think to yourself, well, how can I take a one-man consulting practice where everything depends upon me and sell or transition out of the business? And the answer is, by some careful planning, you can actually do that. I talked to them about reaching an agreement between the two of them, the 75-year-old and the 45-year-old, about short-range planning and long-term planning. Okay, what do you both want to achieve? Well, the older expert, 75-year-old PhD, she wanted to cut down on the practice. She wanted to still practice, and she wanted to travel less, and she wanted to testify less. What did the newer 45-year-old expert want to do? She wanted to get more visibility. She wanted to build up a practice. She wanted to substantially increase her income from doing forensic work, and she wanted to take over the practice. So now we have a synergy, okay? They both wanted things, and both of them kind of meshed. It's just a question of working out the details. We talked about, incorporating the business, reaching an agreement, deciding how much they wanted to work, how much the older expert wanted to work. And that's always a tricky situation. And you don't really need to, come up with a hard and fast number. I want to work for 3 more years. I want to work for 5 more years, because things develop and we're not sure how long we want to work for. Myself, it could be a week, it could be a year, God willing, it could be 10 years, it could be a lot more than that. Okay, so who knows how long we actually want to work for. Now, one of the crucial things was the 75-year-old expert knew this much about expert witnessing and his field. The other expert knew this much. So, as part of the package, as part of the deal, the 75-year-old agreed to mentor and teach this new expert to bring her up to speed so that she can eventually draw cases, bring in cases, go out on her own, and bring in cases into this practice. That was the deal that we were working on for them. So what happened as a result of this consultation that I worked on? The consultant had to agree to become part of the practice. And part of it, actually, I did not get involved in. I told them I did not want to be involved due to potential conflicts of them working out the negotiation between themselves. I thought it was important that they work that out themselves in a satisfactory fashion. And that was actually fairly easy. It wasn't that difficult. The consultant agreed to train and mentor using a lot of proprietary methodology that she had. Turn it over and let the new expert get up to speed. And ultimately, they decided that the newer expert would pay 30% of their gross receipts for 6 years to the selling expert. Okay? So now, we're talking gross receipts. Everybody's on the same page now. They both want to achieve the same goal. They want to maximize the amount of income for the next 6 years. It's not like they have a conflict. They both want to achieve more income, then they're going to divide it up. The older expert pays to the new expert, and they both can be successful. And that is what happened, and it worked extremely well. And both sides were very happy, and they moved on. Yes? I'm going to repeat. You're going to say the questions. We're not going to record your questions. I'm just going to repeat them. But go ahead.
Selling expert is working with he or she's doing all of his income I'm losing
the expert who joined the practice would be getting 30%. Yes. Okay. So both parties wanted to continue working. Okay. And they both wanted to achieve a continuous income. Now the older expert started at 75, and so she really didn't have any time to waste to mentor and get this other person up to speed. So that's case study number 1. Let's look at another case study. A forensic psychiatrist. This was a very interesting case which I just worked on recently. This is a forensic psychiatrist who I'd been working with for some time. And she is a very, very brilliant woman. And she recently started out as a forensic psychiatrist and opened up her own practice. She was working for somebody else before. And she's being mentored by an older forensic psychiatrist. And it was very clear that the older psychiatrist liked her, respected what she could do, and he wanted her to take over his practice. He wanted to cut back and stop practicing eventually. And he made he didn't ask for non-disclosure agreements. He didn't ask for anything like this. He just told her directly. The practice was generating $1.5 million a year in revenue. And after some give and take, he offered that she could take over the practice if she paid him $2,500 a month for 10 years. Okay. Now, that comes out, if my math is right, to approximately $300,000, which is actually not that bad. It's actually quite good. So she had to consider, and she was my client, she had to consider whether or not that was a reasonable amount and whether or not she wanted to do it. Now, in the slide we talk about the details of the purchase are crucial. The devil was in the details here. The details were in the devil's here. She had to figure out whether or not, in actuality, this was a good deal. So we looked at the doctor's receivables and we looked at the doctor's accounts and found out that he had some unique things that he was able to do that probably she couldn't do. So we had to take that $1.5 million and reduce that down as to what would happen when she took over the business. She then looked at his practice and noticed that he was doing a volume practice, seeing a lot of different patients and kind of churning them through. And in the end, she decided that she rejected his offer, even though it was actually a pretty generous offer. She rejected his offer to take over his practice, and she went out on her own. She did not feel comfortable continuing on the type of practice that he had. She didn't feel that was something that she wanted to do. So let's take a look at our next case study. A 63-year-old expert. He has a big national following. He has no other experts, and he's planning long term. He comes to me and says that he wants to plan for the next at least 5 or 10 years. And his situation was that he has built this up as to a one-man solo consulting expert witness practice. And what he was going to do, what he thought he would do, is that he also had, which I think is helpful, a high-level person running his office. And she knew where all the bodies were buried, and she knew how to do all the practice management stuff in the office. And he said he was going to rely on her to keep kind of the practice going. And what he wanted to do was to bring in outside consultants and try to hire these as have her utilize these outside consultants to run the forensic practice in the future. And I thought that was a rather dicey situation. I didn't think that made any logical sense to me at all. I advised him of that, and he went off and hired some management consultants who actually were, I think, had worked in the cardboard box industry, and sent him some gap analysis and some other things that you see that people do in these kinds of situations. And, of course, I mentioned to him that getting somebody that doesn't know anything about expert witnessing is kind of dicey, because now you have to bring them up to speed about what an expert witness practice is, the professional ramifications, and so on and so forth. So he went on, and we'll see what happens with that. That's still a case in progress, as they say. Let's look at case study number 4, and this is an interesting one. A physician built a successful expert witness practice in New York, and this physician was he was an ear, nose, and throat specialist, and unfortunately he passes away. He had no plan whatsoever. His wife had run his practice for many years, so she at least figured out that what she could do, she placed an ad in the New York Times trying to sell the practice after he already died, which is a little unusual. But she did find a physician to take over his practice. She found another ear, nose, and throat specialist that wanted to take over his practice, and he quickly realized, the new doctor, that this practice had a tremendous amount of value, because the practice had hundreds and hundreds of relationships with insurance companies, with employers, with attorneys, both plaintiff and defense, throughout the tri-state, New York, New Jersey area. And he was very shrewd in that he begged her and got her to agree to stay on to run the practice for a number of years, where she knew all the contacts, and she had a lot of the goodwill with all of these people. She asked for $25,000 for this practice, which he gladly paid. And he took over the practice, and what has happened as a result? Because of the fact that he kept the person on, the surviving spouse, they did not lose one client during this transition period. They were very proud of the fact they kept every single client that they had. This physician went on to expand the practice. He was a very good ear, nose, and throat specialist. He was a great expert witness and still is. Commands about $800 an hour. And he's been running this expert witness practice for probably 20 or 25 years. He's probably taken in 20 or 30 million dollars over these years, if not more. I'm not privy to the exact amount, but he's taken in a tremendous amount of money. So what's the lesson? What's the lesson from this situation? You have a doctor who has this very valuable practice. There's no succession plan whatsoever. The doctor unfortunately passes away. The wife has to scramble around trying to figure out what to do. She does the best she could. She went out and sold the practice. And she sold the practice that would later go on to generate $30 million for $25,000. Okay? So the lesson I suggest to you is waiting too long can destroy the value of the practice. Had this doctor, let's say for example, had this doctor worked out a transition plan, had this doctor brought in, let's say he brought in this other doctor. They divided up the money. And they said, we're going to split the money 50-50 for 10 years or something like that. Instead of getting $25,000, his spouse probably would have generated billions of dollars. And this is a case of poor planning or no planning, and it's a situation where that's what happened. So let's take a look at, I think, our last case example, and this is kind of an amusing one. A forensic engineer, and actually the engineer who purchased this practice is actually at this conference. And he has a relative that's actually in this room. This forensic engineer purchased an engineering practice from a 79-year-old forensic engineer. Okay? He was practicing out of his house. Now, the purchaser kept the selling engineer on a salary as a consultant for several years. They had a smooth and orderly transition. The selling expert, I believe, was paid approximately $50,000 up front, plus a percentage of gross income for the past 6 years, for continue on for the next 6 years. The selling engineer, the 79-year-old engineer, signed a 6-year covenant not to compete. He waited until the 6-year covenant not to compete was up. The day after the 6-year covenant not to compete was up, he opened up his own practice. Now, by this time, he's 85 years old by my mathematics. He then actually continues to work, okay, and at 87 years of age, goes and sells the second practice, okay. Wait, the story is not finished yet. So now he sold this practice. He started out at 79. He sold this practice twice after age 79. So this is a pretty savvy old guy. Pretty savvy old guy. He sells his practice twice. You would think by this time he's 85 or 87, he would retire. Absolutely not. He's still practicing today. And the original expert who purchased his practice all the way back still sees him on the opposite side of some cases. By now the expert is in his 90s, okay, and he's still banging away at it. To think that if a 79-year-old forensic engineer who's operating out of his house can sell his practice twice for a good amount of money, think of all of the experts out there that are generating $500,000 a year, $800,000 a year, $1 million a year, and what are they doing with their practices? Nothing. They wait till they get sick, somebody closes it up, they put a sign on the door, and they send the files back to the attorneys, they go home, and the family gets nothing. And that, with all due respect to those people, is not that clever. I mean, it's just not clever at all, I would suggest to you. So, let's look at some of the mistakes that experts have been making, and some of the thinking that goes into this. And I've talked to a lot of experts about this area. First mistake they make is that their skills are so unique that they can't be replaced, nor they can be replicated. Well, I got news for you and everybody else. Everybody's replaceable. Okay? And everybody will be replaceable. And everybody eventually will be replaced. So to think of ourselves as so unique that we cannot be replaced by anybody is absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't make any sense. When Steve Jobs got sick, this is a man that was compared to Thomas Edison, okay, a visionary, a person that was compared to Thomas Edison as one of the leading business people in the United States in the last 100 years. When he got sick, Tim Cook took over. Apple stock now is $1,000, $900. They're doing better now than they ever did before. Okay, and I myself can give you 3 quick stories about myself. I had a law practice right here in Falmouth, Massachusetts. I practiced for 20 years. I graduated law school at age 24. I practiced until age 44. At age 44, I sold my practice to my partners, and I left. And I sold my practice for a good amount of money spread out over 20 years. Okay? And I, at that point, considered myself a very, very, very good trial lawyer. Very good workers' compensation lawyer. I had a national reputation. I spoke all over the country. I wrote newsletters. I testified as expert witnesses in workers' compensation. I was, in my view, right in the top 5% of workers' compensation lawyers. I knew that I could be replaced, and I wanted to be replaced. I trained the person under me. I trained a few people under me. The practice is still going very successfully. It can be done. I started the National Organization of Social Security Claimants Representatives, or NOSCR, actually in my office. That's lawyers who represent people on Social Security disability claims. At one point, we had 2,500 members, lawyer members. After a while, I decided to transition out of that. I trained a young lawyer in my office. She took over. 30-some-odd years later, she's still running that business. No problem. Let's look at my current business now, Seek. I started this in 1979 and 1980. About 15 years ago, I took on a partner, James Mangraviti. Okay? And when I started with Jim, he was kind of new. He started out as my law clerk, actually. I liked what he did, and he has stuck with me. And over the years, we've achieved a lot of things that I would have never achieved by myself. And that's something very important to think about. This is not something where you're going to lose something by bringing somebody on. Over the past 15 years, we've written 20 textbooks. We've increased the number of things that we do. We hold conferences all over the country. We consult for the FBI, the IRS, the Department of Defense, the FAA. We have a very significant consulting practice with the government. A lot of these things could not have been achieved by one person. You needed at least more than one person. Now I no longer have a one-man consulting business practice. I now have an actual business. Both of my adult children work for the business. Okay? When I retire or when I'm gone, the business will go on. There is a plan to continue on the business. There's no question about the business will go on. And what I've done already over the past 14 years is work with Jim to increase his visibility. For example, the last 3 or 4 years I've been harassing him and saying, I want you to be the lead author on our new textbooks. And for years, due to respect, he said, no, you should always be the lead author. And I said, listen, there comes a time where we have to plan for the future. Okay? And finally, I think it was a year or two ago, he said finally, okay, from now on, I'm going to be the lead author on the publications. It's a little thing, but it was actually a very big psychological thing for both of us. Okay? It's something that I knew that the better he gets, the better off I am. And not only that, the better off my children are. Okay? Because I'm 64, he's 44, they're 35. So there's a hard, fast plan here that's been implemented. So, and not only that, it's not only about the money, and I want to make that very clear. You have done a lot of hard work in your career. You've learned a lot of nuances. You've helped a lot of different people, and the work that you have developed, the protocols, the procedures, the techniques, should not just be lost when you have to retire one day and just close up shop. I want my work to continue. Okay? I want Seek to go on. Okay? Maybe it's selfish. Maybe I'm worried about my children. I want them to have an income from now on until they stop working. But that's important. So it's not only about the money whatsoever. So that's the first biggest mistake. That thinking that your skills are so unique that you can't be replaced. So let's take a look at the next one. And this is a similar one. my practice is so dependent upon me that there's no way this practice can be sold or transitioned. And I'll give you some exact quotes, because what I did is I did research. I sent emails to a lot of experts about this, and I said, tell me what you think about selling your practice. And here's what they said. My expert witness practice is specific to the individual, and there is no value to the buyer. My practice is based on myself, experience, credentials, reputation, and is not really transferable. And I see some of you smiling, because that's what you actually think. There are only two things to sell. The first is my client list, and this can be generated by means of a couple of directories, the internet, and a little effort. The other thing is my personal skill, which cannot be transferred. And I would suggest to you that is absolutely, positively wrong. The true measure of how smart and how clever and how good somebody is whether or not, no matter how good they are, they're able to replicate themselves. Okay? And I have done it 3 times already. Okay? I did it with my law firm, and I was the national leader in workers' comp. I turned it over to somebody else after a period of training. Their practice continued on. I started a national organization of 2,500 lawyers. I built up the person that was my executive director, and I said, at one point I said, here, you're in charge. Take it over. And she's still running the practice 35 years from now. I took Jim who started out as my law clerk, who had little experience, and now he's fully capable of running the entire show, and many times actually does run a lot of the practice. And actually, the other thing is that hiring somebody like that, somebody younger, will keep you on your toes. So when I get evaluations on my presentations, if Jim has scored higher on his evaluations, I hear about it the next day. If I score 4.93 for an evaluation, and he scores 4.95, I know when I get up in that morning, the next morning, that evaluation is going to be in my email. No question about it. So I have to be on my toes. And that's really very important. So, you need to think of your practice as a business. It's a professional practice. And it has market value. You need to, think about finding somebody to, buy the practice or enter your practice. Okay. What else do we have here? What other mistakes are we making? They wait till they're in a crisis before they start to think about succession training, transition, or planning. This almost sounds like the federal government. Okay? Everything is a crisis in the federal government now. We're running out of money. We're running out of this. Budgets has to be done by a certain day. Well, let's wait till the last 2 weeks. Wait till the last 2 weeks, and then we'll decide what to do. I mean, that's endemic currently in the government. Well, that obviously doesn't make any sense. And as an expert witness, many of you are planners. You're strategic thinkers. You don't like to leave things hanging to the last second. That's not your personality. And I would suggest to you that is a serious mistake. We get into our 60s or 70s. We suffer a medical emergency. And too often, practice is just closed. And every few months, I hear about an expert who either passed away or, had to close his practice and had to hire somebody to take over the practice. So I would suggest to you 2 things, and they seem to be kind of mutually inconsistent. Start planning a transition practice as early as possible. Don't wait till you're in the midst of a crisis. Okay? You don't want to be in a situation, if you're a doctor, to have spent 40 years overeating, eating fatty foods, not exercising, being 100 pounds overweight, and then walk into the cardiologist's office and when you're age 70 and about to have a heart attack or need a triple bypass and say, Doc, what can I do now? What you could have done now is you should have taken care of yourself for the last 10 years. There's not much we can do now except give you the bypass or maybe if you're lucky a stent. The second thing, which is sort of counterintuitive, is even if you have waited a long time, it's never too late. And as we saw by our 79-year-old engineer who apparently has a covenant with God that he's never going to die. I think he's too busy to die. Okay, so what's the next mistake that we run into? Transition succession planning means that they have to retire and give up practicing. And this, for some reason, people think if you talk about it, it's like certain things you're not supposed to talk about. Death, taxes, retirement. Yeah, it's not that pleasant. But on the other hand, I'm the kind of person, I like to make a plan. I mean, I just don't want to let it fly and see what happens. I mean, I don't want to, one day wake up, in a nursing home and find out that Seek went out of business because there's no plan and everything went to hell in a handbasket, and a very nice business had to close up because I had nobody to take it over. So, I think that's a serious mistake. And the thing is that just because you start planning doesn't mean that you have to stop practicing at all. In actuality, what actually happens, I have found over and over again, is when you take on somebody new, you start acting as a mentor. In actuality, your longevity is extended. That's what happens. First of all, your level of practice goes up because the newer guys are going to keep you on your toes. They'll have more knowledge about the technology. They'll bring a new insight into things that you've been doing for years that you really can't explain anymore why you're still doing it. They'll bring new knowledge to you that they've learned in school and so on and so forth. So it does not mean that just because you're thinking about succession, that means you're closing up your practice and it's all over with. In actuality, you can continue to practice. And what I did when I was practicing workers' comp and what I'm doing now, I was winding down my law office. I started to pick and choose and cherry pick out the cases I want to work on. I said, I want to work on these 10 cases. I don't want to work on these anymore. Turn them over to somebody else. It's the same thing at Seek. When I'm at Seek, I can work on the projects I want to work on. If I don't want to work on a project, I can ask somebody else, will you please work on this project? So in actuality, it increases your longevity and actually makes you, in my view, a better expert. Because now you can pick and choose. If you don't want to take the red eye back and forth to California when you're 80 years old, you don't have to do that. Somebody else can do it. When I was practicing workers' compensation law in the beginning, my partner was 40 years older than me. And the first few months, 6 months, I would follow him around and he would teach me. He'd say, sit next to me and I'll teach you. I said, great. And we would trudge up to Boston. And in a snowstorm, we'd be walking up this hill near the salt and store building. And he's like 75 years old, carrying a briefcase, trudging up a hill. There's a 50-mile-an-hour wind. The only thing I could say to myself at that point was, I am not going to be 75 years old, trudging up a hill in a snowstorm, carrying a briefcase, practicing law when I'm 75 years old. That ain't going to happen. So don't think that just because you start thinking about this, that means that you have to stop practicing. So what can you do? You get to pick the cases you want. You can cut down on the travel. If you don't like certain contentious cases, turn them over to the younger guy. Let him get experience. I got news for you. What is a chore to you is a joy for them. They've never done it before. They're all excited. You send a young lawyer out to a case. It could be a small claims case. It could be slip and fall on a banana peel. If it's a jury trial, they're loving it. Okay. For you, it's just, oh, I've done that. I've crawled under a million buildings. I've done all this stuff before. It's not a big deal. So it's just like a football team or a baseball team. Every year or two, they try to get some younger players in there to keep the age of the team down. It's important. You can hand over administrative chores. When I was practicing law, I got tired of dealing with things that I didn't want to deal with. I didn't want to deal with, after 20 years of practicing law, the fact that the toilet was stuffed up. Okay? I didn't want to deal with it anymore. I didn't want to deal with personnel problems, with people coming in late or not showing up I didn't want to deal with it. I had somebody else, I turned that stuff over to them. I said, you deal with that. I am going to cherry pick out the big cases to work on so that we can make more money and be more successful. I don't have time to waste on this anymore. And that allowed me to get a better result. It keeps you on your toes. And what actually happens is several things. Number one, it extends your career. Instead of shortening it, it extends it. It's counterintuitive, but it's definitely true. The second thing is it makes it more fun. Working by yourself, if you're a loner or you like to work by yourself, can be fine. Working with somebody else, if they're on the same team with you and assisting you, can be a lot more fun, actually. And the mentoring relationship between an older expert and a younger expert can be a lot of fun, especially when you see how you can bring them up to speed and how much better they're getting. So it's not all or nothing. And I think it's actually a good thing. Okay, let's move along to our next mistake. Mistake number 5. Experts don't consider the value of their client list and the goodwill. All of you have dozens of clients, if not more. You have a lot of goodwill built up. You have a lot of attorneys that you've dealt with for years. You have a lot of relationships with insurance companies, insurance carriers, and other people. Okay, this is extremely valuable. And if you can pass it on to another person in your practice, there's a lot of money involved. It's your reputation. And it's, it takes some work. So, let's say you're an example. Let's take the person in, I think it was the first case study with a 45-year-old expert. It might take her years to build up a practice. She has to learn all this stuff herself. She has to get clients. She has to get a relationship. She has to build momentum and all this other stuff. So if a new expert can hook up with an expert who's thinking about succession planning, this is already made for them. If anybody has any brains whatsoever at all, the new expert, and they look at the expert and he's 60 or 70 years old and says, I want to wind down my practice, they realize this is an extremely valuable opportunity. First of all, to learn from the master, and not only that, to have these ready-made relationships that would take them 10 years to build up. There's no need to do that. These people they can introduce you to other people. I was always introducing my younger lawyers to clients. Okay? Even now, when we get some consulting clients, if I get a big consulting client, I go out of my way to try and have Jim, after 1 or 2 attempts, to go in there and start working with that consulting client. I am not going to be here forever. Okay? I would rather now try to get another big consulting client. Okay? This way we have more big consulting clients rather than keep servicing the same client over and over again. It makes a lot more sense. You teach them the nuances. You spent years building up this client list. These contacts are valuable, and the up-and-coming expert will pay to get into this kind of a situation. Either pay out of their pocket if they have the money, which most of them don't, or pay a percentage of receipts as time goes along. They will pay to do this. I'll give you one quick story. My partner was as I said, he was 40 years older than me, and he came to Falmouth actually to retire as a lawyer after a couple of years. He took me in. As soon as he took me in, because I was a young go-getter in those days, the practice started to flourish and expand. And at one point he said, Steve, I want to sell this practice to you. And I said, fine. He said, I think I want $20,000 a year for 5 years. He said, but I'm not ready yet. I said, fine, whatever you want, because he was very nice to me. A few years go by, and now the practice has gone from whatever to 5 times the amount of money. He said, Steve, I'm ready to retire now. I said, okay. He said, that agreement, the gentleman's agreement, we had nothing in writing. The gentleman's agreement we had a few years ago about the $20,000 a year for 5 years, but now the practice is a lot bigger. What I didn't say is yes, I helped make it bigger, but and I said yes. He said, well, I was thinking maybe you could give me more than what we agreed on. And I said, what do you want? And he named a figure, I think it was $30,000 or $40,000 a year. I just said done. Didn't matter. Practice was usually successful. Whether it was $20,000 a year or $40,000 a year didn't matter at all, and I was happy to pay it to him. So the next mistake we see is that mistake number 6, clients, lawyers, and insurance companies will not accept a new expert. I'm the old pro. They want the old pro. They want me. They don't want anybody else. They'll never accept anybody else. Every old pro goes eventually and is replaced by somebody else. Okay? Nobody lives forever except for that 79-year-old engineer. Okay? Everybody is replaced eventually. And I've done it many times. You can bring in a new expert. You can introduce them. You train them. And the old adage is you watch one, you do one, you teach one. For doctors and for other people. And it's the same thing here. I've done it many times. I introduce people. You introduce them. You show they can do them. You start them out with smaller cases. The cases build up. And eventually the new clients like them and actually sometimes want them over you, which is great. And is it easy? No, it's not easy, but it certainly can be done. Introduce them to clients and so forth. A couple of more things, a few questions. If I train a mentor, they're going to steal all my clients. If I train a new expert, they're going to steal all my clients. Well, I follow the golden rule. I treat people the way I'd like to be treated. I've never had anybody steal anything from me over 40 years. Nobody wants to leave when they work for me. They're overpaid, which I do intentionally. I'm an easy boss to work with, and I'm giving them stuff they can't get anyplace else. It's that simple. If you give somebody a great opportunity, unless they're an idiot, they're not going to try and take anything from you. They would really be a bad idea. A couple of more. Taking on an associate. Number 8. Taking on an associate can be a chore and a distraction. And I would suggest to you that actually it's not a chore. It's actually a joy to have somebody working with you and helping you. It extends your career. It gives you incentive to do things. You have a youthful vigor. When the first time they asked you, why can't we do it this way? And you have no answer, that's when you know you got the right person. Okay? They ask you, why are you doing it that way? Well, we always did it that way. Yeah, but you could do it this way. It's a lot better. Well, okay. You're right. We're going to do it that way now. Next mistake, number 9, I'm going to make less money when I have to support an associate. When I bring an associate, I have to pay him $40,000 a year, $50,000 a year. I have to take $50,000 out of my pocket. I'm going to lose money, blah, blah, blah. Answer, absolutely not. 1 + 1 very often equals 3, 4, or 5. No question about it. You have synergy. You have leverage. You can work on bigger jobs. You can spend time doing things which are more productive. Working on bigger jobs, building up bigger clients, doing promotion, doing other things like that, which you never could do because you're so busy taking care of all the little petty things, you have no time to plan and do things for the future. And the last mistake, number 10, I bring in a young, less experienced expert. They're not going to have the money to buy my practice. And that probably is true. You're not going to reach into their pocket and say, okay, here's $250,000, okay? Because very few people have that. They have something that's very valuable to you, and that's sweat equity. They may have to put in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, while they're just like they do in a law firm. You bring in a young associate, you know you can't make partner for 5 years. What do you have to do during those first 5 years? Bust your hump. You're working 18 hours a day. Why? Pie in the sky. If you make partner, you're going to have it made for the rest of your life. If this person impresses you and he takes over your practice and you divide up the income for the next 5 or 10 or 15 years, that works to everybody's advantage. So, and the biggest source of money is not how much money the person buying the practice has. The biggest source of future income is the future income of the business. If the business is generating $1 million a year and they can continue the business for 20 years, that's $20 million to divide up. So whether this person has $10,000 in his bank account or $20,000 doesn't mean anything. What's the most important thing is they can run that $1 million business for 20 years. Now there's $20 million, and there should be plenty of money for everyone. I would suggest to you that some takeaways. I would suggest that the art of succession planning is in its infancy. Most people don't know anything about it, nor do they care about it. I'm going to live forever. I'm going to work forever. And why think about this? More and more experts are starting to look at this as a business. Most businesses have it. If you're a smart business person, you have an exit plan. What's my exit plan? How am I going to end this practice? How am I going to end this business? And if you develop an exit strategy, you're best positioned to generate a stream of income. And it's not always for you. Okay? It's very often it's going to be for your family. You know, if something happens to you, you're no longer going to be there. But what's going to happen to your family? Well, they're going to be left with this business. They're going to have to wind it down. And where are they going to get money from? Well, I have insurance. Well, that's going to go pretty quick. Where's the ongoing money that you could have generated from the sale of the practice? Okay, I'm going to throw it open to some questions.